Before you had a name, before there was a bank account in your favor or against you, before you even understood what it meant to work, to save, or to go into debt, you had already been enrolled in a system. You didn't sign a contract. You didn't give consent. You simply woke up inside a structure that had been centuries in the making, an economic, financial, and political system so deeply embedded in everyday life that most people never stop to question it. And when they finally do, it is often too late to step outside of it. This is not a conspiracy theory, nor an ideological fable. It is a story documented in historical archives, central bank balance sheets, monetary policy decisions, wars financed through debt, and economic cycles analyzed by institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the Federal Reserve, the Bank for International Settlements, and the World Bank. It is the story of how a global economic order was built, one that does not require visible chains to function because it operates through time, debt, labor, and dependence. These are 10 reasons, not isolated from one another but deeply interconnected, that explain why you were born into a system that is not easy to escape. Reason 1. The system existed before you. The system did not begin with you, not with your parents, not even with your grandparents. Its modern foundations trace back to the rise of European nation-states, the consolidation of central banking systems in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the growing need for governments to finance wars, territorial expansion, and infrastructure, without relying solely on immediate taxation. Sovereign debt was born as a tool of state survival. But over time, it became the axis around which the entire modern economy revolves. By the time you were born, your country already carried financial obligations to domestic and international creditors. Bonds issued decades earlier were still accumulating interest. Future budgets were already committed. The tax system was already designed. The rules of money, credit, and trade had already been written. You didn't enter the game. The game absorbed you. Reason 2. The money you use is not neutral. Modern money is not simply a medium of exchange. Since the abandonment of the gold standard in the 20th century, a process that culminated in 1971 with the end of the Bretton Woods system, money became a construct based on trust, monetary policy, and credit expansion. Central banks acquired the ability to create money through indirect mechanisms, by adjusting interest rates, by purchasing financial assets, and by regulating the liquidity of the system. This is not a moral judgment. It is a historical and technical fact, but it carries profound consequences. Money creation does not affect everyone equally. The first recipients of newly created money, governments, banks, and large financial institutions, benefit before prices adjust. The average citizen feels the impact later, in the form of inflation, rising living costs, and a loss of purchasing power. As a result, the money you use every day is not a neutral instrument, but a lever of economic policy that shapes behavior, decisions, and opportunities. Reason 3. Education trains you to function, not to question. Modern education systems emerged alongside industrialization. Their primary goal was not to create independent critical thinkers, but functional citizens, literate, punctual, obedient to rules, capable of performing repetitive and specialized tasks. Economic history, monetary theory, and the real workings of the financial system rarely occupy a central place in basic education. This is not an accidental omission. A deep understanding of how money is created, how debt functions, or how economic cycles are structured requires time, historical context, and systemic thinking. A system that depends on millions of people operating within it does not need everyone to fully understand it. It needs them to trust it just enough, not to question it. Reason 4. Work is the invisible pillar of control. Wage labor is presented as freedom, the ability to exchange time for money. Yet from a structural perspective, it is the mechanism that keeps the entire system in motion. Wages allow consumption. Consumption sustains companies. Companies pay taxes and debts. Governments finance their spending. The cycle repeats itself. Historical data shows that in many developed economies, productivity has grown faster than real wages for decades. This means that the value generated by labor does not translate proportionally into income for those who produce it. The difference is channeled into corporate profits, financial assets, and capital accumulation. Work does not enslave you by itself. What traps you is absolute dependence on it within a system where almost everything, housing, healthcare, education, and security, is monetized. Reason 5. Debt is the master structure. Debt is not an anomaly within the system. It is its backbone. Governments, corporations, and households all operate under the logic of borrowing. According to data from the Bank for International Settlements, global debt, both public and private, has surpassed the size of the world economy multiple times over. For the individual, debt is often presented as opportunity to study, to buy a home, to start a business. For the system, it is stability. A person in debt has less room to maneuver, less capacity to take risks, and stronger incentives to continue participating without interruption. Debt organizes the future before it arrives, by committing income that does not yet exist. Reason 6. Inflation is a silent tax. Inflation does not arrive dramatically. It is not announced with sirens. It creeps in slowly, into the price of bread, of rent, of energy. Historically, periods of prolonged monetary expansion have eroded the value of savings for the middle and working classes, while real and financial assets tend to appreciate. Central banks justify moderate inflation as a mechanism to stimulate the economy. From a technical standpoint, they are not wrong. But its distributive effects are undeniable. Those who live on wages lose. Those who own assets are protected. In this way, the system does not merely persist, it reinforces itself. Reason 7. Property defines power. In classical economic theory, the market is presented as a space of free exchange where everyone participates on equal terms. But this is only the surface of a far more complex reality. In practice, the historical accumulation of property determines who holds real influence. We are not talking only about cash, but about assets, land, housing, stocks, bonds, productive infrastructure. These assets generate passive income and grant indirect political power. While you work for a monthly wage, someone else receives income simply for owning. Consider the data. According to the 2023 Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, the richest 1% of the world's population owns approximately 44% of all global wealth. Meanwhile, the poorest half of humanity owns barely 1% of total wealth. This concentration is not an accident, nor is it the result of individual merit. It is the normal functioning of the system. Historical records reveal a disturbing pattern. After the 2008 financial crisis, while millions of families lost their homes to foreclosures, asset holders saw their portfolios recover and multiply thanks to quantitative easing policies. Between 2009 and 2019, the S&P 500 index grew by more than 400%. If you had invested capital, you became wealthier. If you only had your labor, you stagnated. The system does not prohibit social mobility, but it makes it statistically improbable on a large scale. The reason is mathematical. The rate of return on capital has historically exceeded the growth rate of wages. Economist Thomas Piketty documented in his work Capital in the 21st Century that when R, the return on capital, is greater than G, economic growth, inequality increases automatically. No conspiracy is required, only time. And here is the final detail. You were born without assets. Your starting position on the board was already determined before your first breath. Reason 8. The global system is not symmetrical. Now let's widen the lens beyond national borders, because the system does not end in your country. It is global, and that globality is not equitable. Not all countries operate under the same conditions. The international financial architecture, built after the Second World War through agreements such as Bretton Woods, established clear hierarchies, trade agreements, reserve systems, dominant currencies. All of these favor certain core economies. The United States dollar plays a unique role in global trade and finance. Approximately 60% of global foreign exchange reserves are denominated in dollars. 88% of all foreign exchange transactions involve the dollar. This grants the United States an extraordinary capacity. It can finance massive deficits because the entire world demands its currency. It can create money without suffering the inflationary consequences that would devastate any other nation. This is what is known as the exorbitant privilege, a term coined in the 1960s that remains valid today. The United States can live permanently beyond its means, while other countries must adjust and save. Peripheral countries, by contrast, face severe constraints, dependence on external capital, vulnerability to debt crises, structural adjustments imposed by institutions such as the International Monetary Fund. Argentina, for example, has gone through 22 programs with the IMF since 1956. The prescription is always similar: austerity, privatization, market liberalization. The results are predictably painful for the population. When countries like Turkey, Brazil, or South Africa face economic trouble, their currencies collapse and their populations become poorer almost instantly. When the United States faces a crisis, it prints dollars and exports the problem to the rest of the world through global inflation. The global system reproduces historical hierarchies under a technical appearance. You are told about efficient markets and free trade, but the rules of the game were written by the winners of the Second World War, and every subsequent treaty has reinforced those asymmetries. You were born in a country within this hierarchy, and that geographic position largely determines your economic opportunities before you even learn how to walk. Reason 9. Time is the most controlled resource. Now let's talk about the most valuable resource you possess, even scarcer than money: your time. And this is where the system reveals its most sophisticated form of control. The system does not only organize money, it organizes time. Workdays of 8, 10, 12 hours. Bi-weekly or monthly pay cycles that keep you in a constant loop of need and temporary relief. Debt timelines that stretch across decades. 30-year mortgages. Student loans you repay into your 40s. Retirement ages that keep moving further away. In France, from 60 to 62. In Spain, from 65 to 67. And the trend is global. Your life becomes structured around economic calendars. You wake up because you must arrive at work on time. You eat when the system allows a lunch break. You rest 2 days a week, not because it is biologically optimal, but because the standard work week was defined that way after 19th century labor struggles. Free time becomes the exception, not the rule. Rest turns into a conditional reward. Vacations you earn after months of service. Even your leisure is scheduled. weekends to consume, holiday seasons to spend. Here is a revealing fact. According to the OECD, the average Mexican worker labors 2,226 hours per year. The average German worker, 1,349. Mexicans work nearly 70% more hours, yet produce less wealth per capita. Why? Because time without capital is less valuable. Your time is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it, and that price is set in a market where the supply of labor is always abundant. When time is fragmented and already committed, deep reflection becomes a luxury. You arrive home exhausted. You watch a series. You sleep. You repeat. When do you question the system? On Sunday afternoons? After paying the bills? Helping with the children's homework? Cleaning the house? And a system that is not questioned is a system that perpetuates itself. Control over time is control over consciousness. Scarcity of time produces scarcity of critical thought. Reason 10. Your freedom is their product, and we arrive at the final reason, the most disturbing one. The system has achieved something no other system in history ever did. It does not only control your labor and your money, it has commodified your freedom itself. Think about this. You have more freedom of choice than any previous generation. You can choose between 47 types of coffee, hundreds of streaming channels, thousands of investment options, endless careers, customizable lifestyles. There has never been so much apparent individual freedom, and yet there has never been less real collective power to change the fundamental conditions of your existence. This is the master trap of the modern system. It gave you consumer freedom in exchange for your political power. It allowed you to choose which brand to buy while removing your ability to decide how the wealth you produce is distributed. Look at the historical shift. In the 1950s and 60s, workers had fewer consumption options but more collective power. A unionized factory worker earned enough to support a family, buy a home, take paid vacations, and retire with a pension. Corporate decisions were negotiated with unions. The state regulated aggressively. Capital had real limits. Today, you have Amazon Prime, Netflix, Spotify, instant access to products from all over the world. But that same factory worker now holds 3 temporary jobs with no benefits, pays rent for life, and depends on a stock market that collapses every decade for retirement. You gained consumption options. You lost economic security and collective bargaining power. The system executed the perfect trick. It turned citizens into consumers, and a consumer is not a citizen. A citizen has rights, political power, a voice in collective decisions. A consumer only has preferences and choices within a predefined menu. Now observe how the system commodifies even your resistance. Want to be rebellious? Buy alternative brand clothing. Concerned about the environment? Consume green products at a premium price that subsidizes sustainability marketing. Seeking mental well-being? Subscribe to meditation apps for $14.99 per month? Looking for community? Pay memberships to co-working spaces designed to feel authentic. Every aspect of your identity, your values, your aspirations becomes a market niche with specific products. You do not eliminate the system. You personalize it. You do not escape consumerism. You make it conscious, and conscious costs more. Social media took this to its ultimate expression. You are given a free platform to express yourself, connect with anyone, and build your personal brand. Total freedom, right? But every like, every scroll, every second of attention, every data point about your preferences becomes the product sold to advertisers. Your freedom of expression is their inventory. Mark Zuckerberg testified before Congress that Facebook is free and always will be. Technically true. But Facebook generates $117 billion per year by selling access to your attention and data about your behavior. You do not pay with money. You pay with your psychological life, your time, your privacy, your emotional stability, your ability to concentrate. Everything is monetized. And the brilliance is that it feels like freedom. No one forces you to use Instagram. You choose to open it. No one forces you to buy the new iPhone. You desire it. No one forces you to work 60 hours a week. You accepted the job. Every action is technically voluntary. But the context that makes those choices inevitable was meticulously designed. You need a phone to work, communicate, and access basic services. You need social networks for professional networking. You work extra hours because base wages are not enough to live where the jobs are. Each individual decision is free, but the system of options is rigged. The modern system discovered that direct coercion is unnecessary and inefficient. It is far more effective to design environments where people freely choose exactly what the system needs them to choose. Architectural freedom. You build the maze so that all paths lead where you want, but each person feels they chose their own route. Delivery apps give you the freedom to work whenever you want, but the algorithm penalizes you for rejecting orders, pushes you to work at specific hours, controls how much you earn per trip, and can deactivate you without explanation. You are your own boss, yet you have fewer rights than a traditional employee. Uber and similar platforms turned stable employment into on-demand labor, eliminated worker benefits, and sold it as entrepreneurial freedom. And people accept it because the visible alternative is unemployment. When the options are precarious work or nothing, precarious work feels like opportunity. Even education was transformed under this model. Universities were once a subsidized right. Today, they are an investment in yourself, a product you buy by going into debt. The freedom to choose your career comes packaged with $50,000 in student loans. Your education becomes another financial asset. Student loans are bundled and sold as securities in financial markets. Your future is literally traded. The system sells you the narrative that you are free because you choose. But it never asks who designs the menu of options. You can vote for different parties, but all accept the same fundamental economic premises. You can choose between employers, but all offer market wages set by the same forces. You can buy from different brands, but all are controlled by the same conglomerates. Freedom of choice without power over the conditions of choice is decorative freedom. It is the right to customize your cage, not to leave it. And here is the final twist. This version of freedom is addictive. It feels good to have options, to personalize experiences, to express individuality through consumption. The system trained you to confuse choice with freedom and consumption with identity. Anyone who questions this sounds like a killjoy, like someone who wants to take away your small freedoms. But the freedoms we lost were not small. Economic security, real free time, guaranteed pensions, free education, affordable housing, collective power to negotiate conditions. Those freedoms are not commodified because their existence threatens capital accumulation. So you were born into a system that offers infinite superficial choices while systematically removing your power to change what matters. It gives you freedom of expression on social media while destroying your ability to concentrate. It lets you choose between 1,000 products while concentrating ownership of the companies that produce them. It gives you labor flexibility while eliminating economic stability. Your freedom itself became the product, and while you celebrate your ability to choose, the system consolidates its control over what truly matters. Who owns, who decides, and where wealth flows. The question was never whether you have freedom of choice. The question is who controls the menu.